welcome back to another episode of Buddy's House of Horror podcast, and welcome to the finale of every single horror film I saw in 2023. We're just going to cut right to the chase and get to the episode, but if you guys haven't already, please make sure you're subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to the show, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Leave me a rating and a review if it allows you to do so, and help spread the good word about Buddy's House of Horror. If you have any friends, co-workers, family members that would enjoy the show, make sure you're pointing the show in their direction. And with that, you guys, we're just going to get right to it. So now it's time to get spooky. How's it going, boys and ghouls? Welcome back to another exhilarating edition of Buddy's House of Horror podcast. You guys have read the title. You've been following along with this series for quite a while. And today, hopefully, I'm praying, I'm begging to the spooky lords above that we wrap up every single horror film that I saw in the year of 2023 in this podcast. We've got a few months to cover. We've got September all the way until December. We're going to try to hammer this out as quickly as possible, and hopefully we don't need to do a fifth installment of this. We're going to see how this goes. As of right now, I am planning on wrapping up this podcast, wrapping up this series of reviewing everything that I saw in 2023. But I have a lot on my mind at the moment. So just so you guys know, if you would like to creep on my Letterboxd to see when this podcast was recorded, just a little update. Last night, I have finally finished the series Nana, the romance, punk rock, anime opus that has been sweeping the nation. I finally finished it last night, and I have lots of thoughts about Nana. That is not what we're getting into today, but if you like anime, even if you don't like anime, watch Nana. I was very disappointed with certain aspects of the finale of Nana, so keep that in mind if you do choose to watch the series, that a lot of things are not resolved. And the reason for that is the anime was on hiatus, technically, because the manga was on hiatus. The manga, they wanted to wait until the manga wrapped up in order to continue making the anime. Then the manga went on hiatus, thus the show never got continued. So the show covers chapters 1 through 12-ish, volumes 1 through 12. There's a lot more volumes than that, and even then it's unfinished. So I don't know what the hell's going on with Nana, but I need them to finish it. I need them to animate the last parts of the manga because I can't get this show out of my fucking head. And I actually picked up my electric guitar today. I'll pick up my acoustic guitar every couple months or whatever, hammer it out for a few hours just to get a little bit of practice because I never play guitar ever. Today I whipped out my electric. I haven't whipped out that electric guitar in a year at least, maybe 2 years since I've even touched that electric guitar. I whipped it out today to play the song Rose from Nana. I needed to learn the song. I just love the show. I love the show. Again, maybe someday my wife and I will do a deep dive on the podcast talking about Nana. But I just needed to get that off of my chest because it's been on my mind constantly for the past couple weeks as we've been wrapping up the series. But that is all for Nana. I would love to just continue talking about that anime on this podcast. But, alas, we're here to talk about every horror film that I saw in 2023. And we're going to dive right into it with September 2nd, where I watched the film Unwelcome with my mother-in-law, who was over at the time. This is something that she had picked out. It was a Shudder film. It's a film where basically little gnomes are attacking a little town. Break a promise, pay the price. Londoners Maya and Jamie escape their urban nightmare to the tranquility of rural Ireland, only to discover the malevolent, murderous goblins lurking in the gnarled ancient world at their foot of their new garden. When heavily pregnant Maya's relationship with a local family turns sour, who or what will come to her rescue, and to what extremes will she go to protect her unborn child? This film was not good. This was not a great film. There's not a lot to say about it. It's one of those straight to Shudder films that had it not been on Shudder and had my mother-in-law not been over, this is something that inevitably never would have been watched by me. But that is something that happened. We watched Unwelcome. The next day, on the 3rd, I rewatched a film that I've covered on the show before, called Popcorn. This is 1991. Buy a bag, go home in a box. While holding a horror film festival, a group of students find themselves stalked by a madman who may have a sinister connection to a cult leader. I've seen this film 3 times. I enjoy it. It's a very solid flick. It's got a really good soundtrack, a very unique soundtrack from what you would normally hear in a horror film. The poster art is absolutely iconic. It has the skeleton with taking the girl's head off of it. I like this film quite a bit. Again, we've talked about it in an episode of underrated films. So if you want my full thoughts on Popcorn, that is definitely the episode to check out. Because I watched it with Dynamite Jared, I watched it with Midnight Miles, and I believe this time I may have watched it with my mother-in-law that night as well, on this 3rd watch. This was on the 3rd of September. Also, on that day, I was going bonkers that day. I watched all kinds of stuff on the 23rd, on the 3rd of September. I watched 4 films. I must have rated, you know what? I bet we watched Popcorn after Unwelcome, and I ended up rating it after midnight, because there's no way I watched all these films within one day. But I had to have been off the next day, and I remember watching all 3 of these films in order alone in my house. The first one is Cobweb, one of my favorite films that I saw that was a new release last year. Sooner or later, family secrets creep out. 8-year-old Peter is plagued by a mysterious, constant tapping from inside his bedroom wall, one that his parents insist is all in his imagination. As Peter's fear intensifies, he believes that his parents could be hiding a terrible, dangerous secret. Wow. Why did I say like a dangerous secret? And questions their trustworthiness. I gave this film 3.5 stars. Out of the films that I saw last year, this one was definitely, I think it was in like the top 10, if not the 10-15 for sure, of new releases. It's got a great creature. It's got a great story. I love a lot of the concepts within this film. I do think it is a little bit predictable at times. Like, there is a scene earlier on where they're introducing a rat poison, and you're just like, why does this scene exist? Well, obviously the rat poison is coming back later, and obviously it does. So, like, there is a lot of stuff that is a bit predictable in the film, but overall, I think this film is something that a lot of people should go and see. It was kind of snuck into theaters. I think it came out, like, the same weekend as Barbie and Oppenheimer. It came out on the same Barbenheimer weekend. So it kind of just snuck into theaters. I think it was only in there a couple days. I ended up seeing it streaming on... It was either on Peacock or something like that. I think I even had to, like, pay to rent it, maybe. No, that doesn't sound like me. There's no way I paid to rent this. But regardless, I do recommend Cobweb. It's a good, solid flick. Same with the next film that was on my list, We're All Going to the World's Fair, directed by the same director who did I Saw the TV Glow, which was a film that I rather enjoyed this year in 2024. This was their previous film, We're All Going to the World's Fair. Reality and fantasy begin to blur when teenager Casey, alone in her attic bedroom, immerses herself in a role-playing horror game online. Again, another solid 3.5 stars. This film is, I don't want to say, yeah, you could basically say that this is like a found footage film. It all takes place with the teenager. It's on the computer screen, and you're watching their sanity get lost, basically playing this game. You're kind of like just spying on them through the webcam. Like, it never changes from what I remember. From what I remember, it all takes place in that attic through the webcam of everything that's going down in this film. You can definitely see the building blocks that this lays in order to get to I Saw the TV Glow. Like, there is a lot of just like the color palette, like the same like visuals, like a lot of it is very in tune with what this director had continued to do in their career. So although I saw the TV glow a little bit better, We're All Going to the World's Fair is a solid flick that I think that people who are fans of the genre should check out. The next film is a film that I think gets a little tiny bit of a harsh rap. I don't think it's a phenomenal film. This is only a 2.5-star film for me, but I am a huge fan of this franchise. I don't necessarily even think that this is the worst film within that specific franchise. But when you look at the reviews of this film, especially for my friends, you're seeing a 0.5 star, 1 star, another 1 star, another 0.5 star, 1.5 stars, very generous with 1.5 stars. I gave it 2.5. It's by no means a masterpiece. But Paranormal Activity Next of Kin, I did not think was as bad as everyone said that it was. The Activity is reborn. Margot is a documentary filmmaker looking to meet her long-lost mother and extended family in a secluded Amish community. She and her film crew soon realize the family that welcomed them into their home might be hiding a sinister secret. There's a lot that I love in this film. The ending goes completely fucking bonkers. Obviously, this is a found footage film, as all Paranormal Activity films are. This film breaks found footage towards the end. It just starts doing batshit shit. Whatever it wants to do, batshit shit is what I said. It is doing some batshit crazy ass shit. And it's pretty bad. It is pretty bad when it just breaks found footage. It makes absolutely no sense. I understand why people don't like it, but I don't think that the film leading up to a lot of the things people care about is as bad as people say it is. I'm invested in the story. One of my favorite subgenres of film are films about making films. They're making a documentary film within this film. Hence why they are filming everything. They needed a way for them to film everything. They needed a reason why it was in high quality. These are professional film crews that are going to this Amish community to uncover these secrets. There's a lot of stuff in this film that I like, but there is a lot of stuff that I can acknowledge is pretty bad. I love the atmosphere. I love the environment. It's a little predictable. Is it necessarily better than a lot of the run-of-the-mill found footage films that you can find out there? No. But I do think it's on the same level as, you know, your Taking of Deborah Logan's, your Hell House LLC's, stuff like that. I don't think that this is in the piss-poor level of found footage film. Y'all seen Devil's Due? Y'all seen some of these? Y'all seen Hell House LLC 2? I actually liked the third Hell House LLC. The second one, not great. There's definitely a lot worse found footage films out there. There's definitely a lot worse elements within the Paranormal Activity franchise out there. I don't think this is anywhere as bad as Ghost Dimension. I just don't. It has, as for as bad as the ending is, it's entertaining. It's funny. It has suspense. I don't know. I like the film. I gave it 2.5. 2.5. It is a fine film. I don't think it deserves anything above a 2.5. I'm not insane. But I don't think it's as bad as everyone else thinks it is. Next film I watched is not one of my all-time personal favorites. Not a film that I find myself rewatching every single year, but a really great, classic, 4-star film that has come out in the last 20-ish years. It's crazy to think that this film came out over 20 years ago, just barely, just a smidgen. But 28 days later, of course, the classic apocalyptic film that was followed up by 28 weeks later, and we're gonna get 28 years later. We're gonna have to get 28 years later. His fear began when he woke up alone. His terror began when he realized he wasn't. 28 days after a killer virus was accidentally unleashed from a British research facility, a small group of London survivors are caught in a desperate struggle to protect themselves from the infected. Carried by animals and humans, the virus turns those it infects into homicidal maniacs, and it is absolutely impossible to detain. Of course, directed by Danny Boyle, legendary director within his own right, starring the great Cillian Murphy, again of Oppenheimer fame. We're just talking about Oppenheimer a lot during these podcasts for some reason. A truly generational film, that Oppenheimer. But what can I really say about 28 weeks later, 28 days later rather, that hasn't been said before? If you haven't seen it, this is an absolute essential of the early 2000s to watch, something to add to your watch list if you have not seen it already. This was the last horror film that I watched before I went on vacation to Los Angeles. So I was out and about for a while, didn't watch a ton of films during this time. I did watch one horror film when I was on my trip, and that was The Night Strangler. I don't know why I decided to pop on The Night Strangler, probably from an Airbnb, just something casual I could watch on my phone. This is, of course, the sequel to The Night Stalker. Both of these films I've talked about endlessly, but just to do my due diligence as a podcaster to cover it, I must cover the news. We are here to report the news, not suppress it. So I must report the news of The Night Strangler. Not as good as The Night Stalker, which is a 5-star. The Night Strangler is a solid 4. After being run out of Las Vegas, reporter Carl Kolchak heads for Seattle and another reporting job with the local paper. It's not long before he is on the trail of another string of bizarre murders. It seems that every 21 years for the past century, a killer kills a certain number of people, drains them for their blood, and then disappears into the night. Kolchak is on his trail, but can he stop him? A centuries-old alchemist versus the witty, wisecracking Carl Kolchak. The biggest thing about this film that is a critique, it is very similar to the original film. And this plagues the entire series of Kolchak. The first one is obviously the best. The Night Stalker, the film, is obviously the best. The sequel kind of does the same thing. The television series kind of does the same thing in every episode. This one in particular is very similar to the original film because he's also dealing with a very old, nefarious villain. It's not like he's fighting it's not the Spanish Moss Murders. He's not fighting a monster like that. He's not fighting the Headless Horseman on a motorcycle. It's literally a vampire-esque character. It's draining of the blood. He's centuries old. He needs the blood to stay alive. He is just an alchemist. He's not a vampire. So it is very, very similar in that regard. I do like the setting of Seattle. I like the Seattle underground that it gets into. I like the sleaziness of Seattle that he gets into. He's going to strip clubs. He's going hitting up Al Lewis. I like the film quite a bit. Not quite a 5-star, but pretty damn near close. Up next, we're talking about 2 90s witch films that I watched with my wife on the same day. We're going to go over them real quick, because this first one you can barely even call a horror film. It definitely has horror, sort of ambiance to it, but it is not a horror film. This is a film starring the one and only Sandra Bullock. We're talking about practical magic. For 2 sisters from a family of witches, falling in love is the trickiest spell of all. Sally and Gillian Owens, born into a magical family, have mostly avoided witchcraft themselves. But when Gillian's vicious boyfriend Jimmy dies unexpectedly, the Owens sisters give themselves a crash course in hard magic. When policeman Gary's growing suspicious, the girls struggle to resurrect Jimmy and unwittingly inject his corpse with an evil spirit that threatens to end their family line. We got Sandra Bullock. We got Nicole Kidman. It's good. It's vibey. It is such a fall aesthetic movie. This film is just beautiful to look at. The opening scene is iconic. The ending is iconic. I like the film. It's not something I need to revisit time and time again, but I do enjoy a good practical magic every once in a while. We're talking about The Craft next. I think I've talked about The Craft a few times on this show before. Of course, 1996, directed by Andrew Fleming. Of course, starring the 4 witches who have become timeless. The original, The Craft, I've not seen the remake, but this first one is beyond iconic. Welcome to the Witching Hour. A Catholic school newcomer falls in with a clique of teen witches who wield their powers. I guess they do weird things with their powers. But a clique of teen witches who wield their powers against all who dare to cross them, be they teachers, rivals, or meddlesome parents. If you haven't seen The Craft before, what are you doing listening to this podcast? Go watch The Craft. Pause this. Make sure you come back, but pause this. Go watch The Craft. Watch The Night Stalker 2 while you're at it. Maybe Friday the 13th Part 2 as well. That one's a good one. Trying to think. Watch some essentials. Go watch the pilot episode of Night Gallery. Go watch something cool. And then come back and listen to the podcast after you've seen all of those. Now we're going to talk about the WNUF Halloween special, a film that I've watched a couple times now. I've seen this film at least twice or 3 times. I've watched this usually around Halloween, maybe as I'm carving pumpkins, putting stuff on around the house, because I like that it works as a news broadcast. It has commercials in it. It's kind of good to have on in the background. It's a good vibey, aesthetic-y film. It's very reminiscent of Late Night with the Devil. It's very reminiscent of the Ghost film, Right Here, Right Now. It's a TV special that goes off the rails. It is a small-town newscast that goes off the rails, and it's presented as such. It is not presented as a narrative film. It is presented as if you were watching a lost tape of this Halloween special that had aired on the WNUF news station. From 1987, the infamous live broadcast. A local TV personality leads a team of supernatural investigators, including an exorcist, into the darkest corners of a supposedly haunted house. He goes into the haunted house, he's playing tricks on them, but it turns out something evil could be happening. The TV host in this is such an unlikable dick that you cannot wait to see what happens to him. There are some things in this film that I do not like. I'm not necessarily a fan of the reveal once you reveal what is actually going on within this house. But leading up to that, it's very nice. It gets you in that spooky mood. It is a good thing to just pop on as sort of an ambiance film, as I said. The WNUF Halloween special gets a thumbs up from me. The next day on the 25th, my wife and I watched The Haunting on VHS, and we did something. This was a great night. This was a great night for us watching The Haunting from 1963. I'm obviously talking about the original film, not the one with Owen Wilson, not the Haunting of Hill House series that was on Netflix, although I do like that series quite a bit. The original film, The Haunting, by Robert Wise, 1963. My wife and I had a blast watching this. You may not believe in ghosts, but you cannot deny terror. Dr. Markway, doing research to prove the existence of ghosts, investigates Hill House, a large, eerie mansion with a lurid history of violent death and insanity. This film is, I don't want to say it's a hidden horror. I don't want to say it's a forgotten classic, but it kind of is. There's not a ton of people talking about The Haunting. Those who know it love it. Those who have seen it will always sing its praises. But it hasn't been seen by everybody. It was directed, of course, by Robert Wise. Maybe too good of a filmmaker for his own good. Like, he can do pretty much any genre. He did West Side Story. He did The Haunting. He did Star Trek. He did The Sound of Music. He did The Day the Earth Stood Still. He did one of my favorite Boris Karloff films, The Body Snatcher. He is just a good, solid filmmaker. I haven't seen all of his stuff, obviously, but the problem with Robert Wise and why he's not really seen in this upper echelon is because he does so many genres so well. It's not like he's a horror auteur or someone who's really good at comedy movies like a Judd Apatow or something like that. He does it all. He's a jack of all trades, a master of all trades, but he's spread so thin throughout these genres that he's not as well known as some of these other guys making films, but really one of the greatest directors when you look at his filmography. There, you cannot deny it. And when we watched this film, we had a great time, and that is because we watched this film outside in hammocks. I brought my television outside, my TVCR, a television with a VCR built in. We watched this on VHS outside in front of a crackling fire. We made campfire nachos. We made nachos with the blaze of a fire and watched The Haunting. Probably drank a few beers. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. Not that I was too drunk. But this was a long time ago, obviously. I guarantee I had at least one alcoholic beverage that evening. This was a great time. This was a great watch. I love The Haunting. Took a couple days off of horror. I took a solid 3 days off of horror and caught Saw 10 in theaters. A film that I did my own personal review of it. Of course, we talked about it at length as well in the ranking of all of the Saw films that Miles and I did last year. We did a complete, definitive series ranking of the Saw franchise. And of course, Saw X, Saw 10 was included in that. Witness the return of Jigsaw. Between the events of Saw and Saw 2, a sick and desperate John Kramer travels to Mexico for a risky and experimental medical procedure in hopes of miracle cures for his cancer, only to discover the entire operation is a scam to defraud the most vulnerable. Armed with a newfound purpose, the infamous serial killer returns to his work, turning the tables on the con artist in his signature visceral way through devious, deranged, and ingenious traps. If you want to hear my full thoughts on Saw X, go check out my review of it. Go check out our ranking of the entire series. But I enjoyed the film for what it was. I gave it 2.5. So I liked it. I don't know if I'll rewatch it again unless I'm rewatching the whole series. But I did like it. There were things about it that I enjoyed. For shizzle. We're moving on to October, guys. That was the end of September. September is over. Someone let Earth, Wind, and Fire and Billy Joe Armstrong know about September being over. Because it's October, baby. Yes, it is officially spooky season October, the greatest month out of the year. And I watched a lot of films during October. I watched some films during November and December as well. I just went through and kind of checked and see where I was at. There are about 30 films left, guys. So if I spend around a minute on each film, we can wrap up this podcast in a reasonable amount of time. Obviously, some may take longer than a minute. Some may take a little less than a minute. But if we do that, we'll be on a solid foundation to wrap this up and have this podcast be the finale of 2023. So we're going to be starting with Scream 4, the fourth Scream film. I don't know where I would rank it in terms of Scream films. Is it towards the top or towards the middle? I'm not exactly sure, but this was from 2011. New decade, new rules. Really, this is 2 decades after, the first one. The first one was in the 90s. So a completely new decade. Completely new rules. 2 new sets of decades, 2 new sets of rules, really. 10 years have passed, and Sidney Prescott has put herself back together thanks to her writing. However, her return to Woodsboro speaks the return of the ghost face killer. Well, I guess this is 10 years after the original, so obviously, sequentially, they're not mapping it out with the year in which they have taken place. So I guess it is a decade later. 10 years have passed. It was really significantly longer than that. But regardless, Scream 4 is a film I have mixed feelings about. It is it's not one of my very, very favorites of the franchise, but it's not one of my least favorites either. My least favorite undoubtedly would be Scream 3. But Scream 4, I don't know if I like it better than the newer films or not. it's on par with Scream 2 for me, maybe. I'm not the biggest fan of Scream 2. Like, I think Scream 2 is a fine film. It is a good film. It is a 3-star film. A lot of people talk about it like it's better than the original. I think that's just blasphemous. But Scream 4, solid flick. If you haven't seen it yet, avoid the requel versions of Scream because it does give away the ending of Scream 4, which was the worst part about the requels. That same day, I rewatched Psycho, starring my man, Simon Oakland. The GOAT, Simon Oakland, star of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Also featuring Anthony Perkins. Oh, and also featuring, Janet Leigh, whoever that is. The real star of the show, Simon Oakland. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock in 1960, obviously. A new and altogether different screen excitement. Do I need to explain the plot of Psycho to you guys? Do you know the twist in Psycho? What about Psycho could I possibly say that hasn't been said already? I guess I could read the Letterboxd. When real estate agent clerk Marion Crane goes on the lam with a wad of cash in hopes of starting a new life, she ends up at the notorious Bates Motel, where manager Norman Bates cares for his housebound mother. I mean, that is the story in and of itself. She does go to the Bates Motel. It is ran by Norman Bates. He's caring for his mother during that time, whatever that means. It has one of the most famous scenes of all time in it. It's the shower scene, one of the most famous scenes of all time. Second only to the scene with Simon Oakland. That might be the second most famous scene in Psycho is the shower scene. The most famous scene is the one with Simon Oakland. If you haven't seen Psycho already, you need to go see Psycho. You need to see Psycho. I wish, when I say you need to go see Psycho, I wish you could physically go to a drive-in cinema and watch Psycho. That would be absolutely phenomenal. I would love to watch Psycho at a drive-in. Next film is VHS 85, where at the time of this podcast, of this specific podcast, I haven't decided whether or not I'm making a full review of VHS 85 yet. So we will just read the description and move on, because I may be doing a full episode about VHS 85. I might be doing a full episode about VHS 85. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Unveiled through a made-for-TV documentary, 5 chilling tales of found footage horror emerge to take viewers on a gore-filled journey through the grim underbelly of the forgotten 1980s. All I will say is Miles is obsessed with the wraparound. Literally obsessed with the wraparound in this film. Anyway, next film is Diabolique from 1955. Watch this on Criterion. Watch this on Criterion with my wife. See it, be amazed at it, but be quiet about it. The cruel and abusive headmaster of a boarding school is murdered by an unlikely duo, his meek wife and the mistress he brazenly flaunts. The women become increasingly unhinged by a series of odd occurrences after his corpse mysteriously disappears. This is one of the most legendary films of all time for you horror auteurs out there. This is a film horror fans know. Not a lot of the mainstream public knows about it. If you haven't seen it yet and you're a hardcore horror fan, this is one to add to your watch list. The driving scenes in this film are beyond hard. Beyond hard. Diabolique gets a thumbs up for me, 4 stars on Letterboxd. Great film. Next film, not so great. It's a film I did a whole rant about last year. The Exorcist Believer. Holy hell. Directed by a man who I held in very high regard but has since severely fallen from grace. Miles' best friend, DGG, David Gordon Green. Do you believe? Since his wife's death, Victor has raised his daughter Angela alone, After she and her friend return from a 3-day disappearance with missing memories, they begin displaying frightening behavior reminiscent of the McNeil possession 50 years prior. This film was such a bomb that they're actually continuing, they planned on making a trilogy, but they're scrapping this one and gave it to my boy Mike Flanagan. I don't have anything against David Gordon Green as a person. I just really question a lot of the decisions that he has been making in the past few years. I did not enjoy this film. I don't know what else to say about it that I didn't say in my review/rant last time. So if you haven't seen that yet, go and check it out. That, of course, was on my channel from last year. I needed a little bit of a cleanse after that. I took a 5-day break from watching horror films. 5 whole days. And I had to cleanse it with The Bride of Frankenstein. Watched this with my wife. She had never seen it, I believe. This was her first time watching it. Such a phenomenal film. Such a phenomenal film. This is a 4.5. Easy 4.5 stars. If you give this film anything less than 4 in general, you're out of your mind. Like Dan Kinham here, 2.5. Please, miss me with that. Dabby Doo knows what's up. Jared knows what's up. Lot of 5 stars. Lot of 5 stars for my Letterboxd. My boy Jeremy Herbert, 5 stars. I don't know, man. I don't know how you don't like this one, dude. She's alive. Dr. Frankenstein and his monster both turn out to be alive, not killed, as previously believed. Dr. Frankenstein wants to get out of his evil experiment business, but when a mad scientist, Dr. Pretorius, kidnaps his wife, Dr. Frankenstein agrees to help him create a new creature. Iconic villain in Dr. Pretorius. Iconic moments with the monster himself. This is, of course, where the monster learns to speak. He's smoking cigars. If you are going to watch this film with the perception that the bride is going to be there the entire time, you will be let down. This film is leading up to getting to the bride. So the bride's only in it at the end for a little bit. So take that with caution if you think the bride's just going to be walking around this entire movie. That's not what this movie is. It's one of my favorite Universal films. The Frankenstein films, at least the first trilogy, is a solid horror trilogy. Maybe the first great horror trilogy. We're moving on to The Night Strangler, and we're skipping right over it because I believe I talked about The Night Strangler earlier in this exact episode of the podcast. Or it might have been I think I watched it in September. Yes, I watched it on September 12th. So we're skipping over The Night Strangler. We're skipping over The Night Strangler. We're skipping over Practical Magic because I watched Practical Magic again in October because my wife claimed I wasn't paying attention the first time. So Practical Magic, was watched again in October. Followed up by Donnie Darko. A little bit of backstory about Donnie Darko. Donnie Darko was my favorite film in high school. It was in my top 5 for sure, because my top 5 swapped around all the time. My top 5 was The Godfather, it was Donnie Darko, it was Fight Club, and then there were a couple others that have since made their way out of contention. But those 3 films, always I considered my favorite film of all time. Donnie Darko was one of those. Then I got a little bit older. Started going to college. Every time I rewatched Donnie Darko, it got a little worse and a little worse. And then it got a little worse. So for years, I avoided it because I was like, if I keep watching this film, I'm going to hate it. I don't want to watch Donnie Darko ever again because I don't want to hate it. But every time I'm rewatching it, I just like it less and less and less. So for years, I didn't want to watch it. But my wife finally convinced me to rewatch Donnie Darko. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, this should never have left my favorite films of all time. This film was a masterpiece. This was 5 stars. It was a 5-star film on my latest rewatch. On my latest rewatch, I gave it 5 stars. Why are you wearing that stupid man suit? After narrowly escaping a bizarre accident, a troubled teenager is plagued by visions of a large bunny rabbit that manipulates him to commit a series of crimes. Is this film a little convoluted? Sure. Does this film make sense a lot of the time without diving deep into the lore?
Maybe not always. But I love this film. I love this film so much. I don't even know what to say about it. This has moved its way back up into one of my favorite films of all time. Maybe not top 5, but one of my favorite films of all time, Donnie Darko. It has solidified itself as one of my favorite films of all time. I tried to deny it for years. I tried to avoid it for years because I was scared I wasn't going to like it. It's a 5-star, everyone. It is a 5-star, confirmed. 100% confirmed. By everybody. I'm scrolling through my Letterboxd right now. Lots of 5s. Some 4.5, some 3. We got some haters. Of course, Jared gave it 2. We got a few haters, but one of the greatest films ever. One of the greatest films ever. Donnie Darko. Followed up by another modern masterpiece, FNAF. Five Nights at Freddy's. Bro. Are you trying to get FNAF'd? Holy shit. Can you survive 5 nights? Recently fired and desperate for work, a troubled young man named Mike agrees to take a position as a night security guard at an abandoned themed restaurant, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. But he soon discovers that nothing at Freddy's is what it seems. I thought this film was a mixed bag. Did I go in thinking this was going to be a great film? No. Did I go in expecting myself to maybe be surprised a little bit? Yes, I wanted to be surprised. I wanted to like the film. But as it is, it doesn't work. There's a lot of things about the film that doesn't work. Even if you're really into a lot of the lore, like I was, like I knew a lot of the lore, this just didn't click. It didn't click in a lot of the ways that I wanted it to click. Maybe I'm too old for it. Maybe I'm not as engrossed in this universe as I should be. But you should be able to go to a film, watch it, and enjoy it for what it is. Take it for what it is. I don't like how much they kind of explain. I don't like that they made the monsters, well, the Freddy, Bonnie, and the gang, how they made them turn so quickly into sympathetic characters that you can kind of root for. I thought the whole lore with like you know how he's daydreaming and he sees the deceased children and stuff, like I thought that was all ridiculous. But like, I don't know, there was something about it that there's things about it I liked. There's a lot of things about it that I do not like. I thought the film was funny because Josh Hutcherson or whatever, I noticed he's a little short. And then the other lead who's in the film is very obviously much taller than him, but they're trying their best to hide it, and it doesn't always work. So I thought that was a little funny as a fellow short king myself. I thought that was amusing. But overall, like, I don't see any reason to rewatch this. The Matt Pat stuff in there, Matt Pat plays a waiter, and I don't remember his specific dialogue, but I think someone like asks him like what the best thing on the menu is, and he gives them a recommendation, like whatever it is. He's like, oh, I like the bacon and eggs, but that's just a theory or something ridiculous. And I was cringing to my soul, but it was fine. It was fine. I like Matt Pat, fellow Ohio boy. So interesting film. Not one that I can easily recommend. After that, I watched a few Universal films like right in a row. The Mummy's Ghost was the first on that list. The first horror film that I ever watched, The Mummy's Ghost. I rewatched it last October. Nameless, fleshless, deathless. An Egyptian high priest travels to America to reclaim the bodies of ancient Egyptian princess Anenka and her living guardian mummy Karis. Learning that Anenka's spirit has been reincarnated into another body, he kidnaps a young woman of Egyptian descent with a mysterious resemblance to the princess. However, the high priest's greedy desires cause him to lose control of the mummy. This film, for me, is one of the most iconic out of the Universal Monster films. I am obsessed with the ending that made me so terrified as a child. I've talked about the ending of The Mummy's Ghost many, many times. If you haven't seen my horror story, which is one of the first podcasts that I did for the House of Horror, I think it was my first solo show ever, one of my first solo shows ever, where I told the story about how I myself got into horror films. I do a deep dive into The Mummy's Ghost about the first time that I watched it, what I was thinking at the time, and what I think about it now. Obviously not one of my favorite Universal Monster films, but definitely one of the most iconic for me in my memory. The next one was The Invisible Man. I believe I watched all these on VHS as well. I felt like watching VHS, so just was popping them in one after another. Invisible Man, James Whale, 1933. H.G. Wells' fantastic, out-of-this-world show. Working in Dr. Cranley's laboratory, scientist Jack Griffin was always given the latitude to conduct some of his own experiments. His sudden departure, however, has Cranley's daughter Flora worried about him. Griffin has taken a room at the nearby Lion's Head Inn, hoping to reverse an experiment he conducted on himself that made him invisible. But the experimental drug has also warped his mind, making him aggressive and dangerous. He's prepared to do whatever it takes to restore his appearance. Again, another film that I've talked about quite a bit on the show before. I love The Invisible Man. It's one of the most comedic of the Universal monster films, not in an unintentional way, but in an intentional way. It's intentionally funny. There's a lot of jokes in there. I love The Invisible Man as a character. I wish they would have found a way to sort of bring him back through the sequels. Every other sequel has a different Invisible Man within it. But anyway, cannot recommend The Invisible Man enough. Next, I watched Revenge of the Creature, which is the final film of the no, actually this is the second one. The Creature Walks Among Us is the third. This is the sequel to Creature from the Black Lagoon. This is the second film, Revenge of the Creature, 1955. All new thrills, shocks, suspense. In a tributary of the Amazon, a monster, half man, half fish, is captured and placed in a reservoir in a Florida national park to be observed by scientists. Do you think he's going to get out of captivity? Do you think he's going to run amok in this park? Absolutely. Revenge of the Creature, not one of the greatest in quality. It does have a little bit of entertainment value, but it's another one of those films when the creature's not really doing anything, you don't give a shit about the rest of the story. You don't care what the humans are doing. You just want to see that creature. Give me the creature. Show me that creature. Solid 2-star film, everybody. Solid 2-star film. But up next is a film that I definitely do not consider a 2-star film. I rewatched Insidious yet again. Not sure why. I think someone was over and they wanted to watch it. It was probably my mother-in-law. If I'm putting 2 and 2 together, I believe my mother-in-law probably wanted to watch the original Insidious. So we watched it. Oh, you know what? No, I am wrong. I am mistaken because I'm seeing the second film that I watched on this day. This was the 29th of October, and I remember why we watched this. Maisie wanted to watch Insidious, and then we all watched the following film that I'm about to talk about on that night as well. We're going to skip over Insidious. I already talked about Insidious in the last episode of all the horror films I talked about in 2023. Obviously, because I watched the entire franchise. The film we watched after that was Malum, which is a remake of a film by the same director, Last Shift. This is the updated version, I guess, of what he was trying to do with the original film. This is about 10 years later, I want to say. Feed the Demon. A rookie police officer willingly takes the late shift at a newly decommissioned police station in an attempt to uncover the mysterious connection between her father's death and a vicious cult. This film doesn't have a lot to write home about. It was a film that I enjoyed watching. It's not one that I'm probably going to revisit too much. I haven't seen Last Shift since it came out, and I don't even think I've seen the whole thing. It might have just been on at a friend's house or something. But I do want to rewatch Last Shift and see if I like it better or worse than Malum. I thought Malum was just kind of an okay film. I gave it 2 stars, so another solid 2-star film. Of course, once shit goes off the rails at the end, it is quite entertaining, but I remember it takes a while to kind of get in. It takes a while to even pique your interest. I don't even want to say it's a slow burn. I want to say it's genuinely hard to kind of be entertained by it in a lot of ways from what I can recall. Next, on the day before Halloween, I watched the original 1931 Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi, directed by, I'll use that in quotations, Todd Browning, because at times it felt like he wasn't making a movie, or he forgot he was making a movie. I don't know. He thought he was having a static shot recording a stage play. But the parts that are good are absolutely phenomenal. It's just a hair away from 5 stars because of some of those other glaring issues. But the story of the strangest passion the world has ever known. British estate agent Renfield travels to Transylvania to meet with the mysterious Count Dracula, who is interested in leasing a castle in London and is, unbeknownst to Renfield, a vampire. After Dracula enslaves Renfield and drives him to insanity, the pair sail to London together, and as Dracula begins preying on London socialites, the two become the subject of study for supernatural Professor Abraham Van Helsing. The beginning portion of this film is absolutely incredible. Renfield traveling to Transylvania, absolutely iconic. Once he arrives at the castle, film history was made. Atmosphere is unreal. Lugosi's performance, absolutely insane. Dwight Frye does great as Renfield as well. Once you get into some of the human characters, like once Mina's introduced, Dr. Seward's introduced, it's not as interesting. Again, it becomes a little bit of a stage play because that is what it was based off of. Edward Van Sloan is good as Van Helsing. He has a lot of chemistry with Bela Lugosi. They played these roles on the stage together, so they already had that built-in chemistry. If you haven't seen the original Dracula, you gotta check it out. You gotta check out the original Dracula. The beginning portion, the beginning third of the film is amazing. The middle portion drags on a little bit. The ending is fun too. But regardless, I've talked about Dracula billions of times on this show. Maybe one day I will do a deep dive on the 1931 Dracula. Maybe I will do a commentary of the original 1931 Dracula. That would be an interesting one to do. On Halloween itself, I was in a little bit of a werewolf mood, I guess. In a little bit of a Universal mood. Because I watched the Universal werewolf classic, Werewolf of London, not the Wolfman. Beware the stalking being half human, half beast. A strange animal attack turns a botanist into a bloodthirsty monster. Obviously, not as well known and not as good as the Wolfman, but still an entertaining watch nonetheless. The Doctor in this is kind of an asshole. And when he becomes the wolf, the werewolf of London, it definitely plays out a little bit how you would expect like a Jekyll and Hyde story to play out. It doesn't really feel all that much like the typical werewolf film that you would see with the Wolfman and stuff like that. It is definitely more of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of split personality type of story. So take that for what it is. Definitely a couple stops short of classic, but nonetheless, I enjoy the film quite a lot. We're moving into November, ladies and gents. November is the month to be, the month right before December. Get your turkeys ready, because November is coming at you right now, and we're starting off with the 4th film in the Hell House LLC franchise. This one's Origins, The Carmichael Manor, a new release film at the time from 2023, of course brought to us by the same team and the same director as the original trilogy. Every story has an origin. A group of cold case investigators stay at the Carmichael Manor, site of the grisly and unsolved murders of the Carmichael family back in the 80s. After 4 nights, the group was never heard from again. What is discovered on their footage is even more disturbing than anything found on the Hell House tapes. So this one is very similar to the other films where these events have already happened and they're trying to piece it together by watching the footage of what went down. This one, I think out of the franchise, this one might be the middle of the road one. It's not as bad as part 2. I'm not sure if it's as good or as bad as part 3. Part 3 definitely had a lot of ups and downs as well. I would put it about at the same level as part 3. Part 3 had a lot worse CGI than this film did. This one was a little bit more standard. But I do enjoy the first film quite a lot. So none of them top the first film. This one and part 3 are kind of in the middle. Part 2, undoubtedly the worst one. There's not a ton to say about it. It's very similar in tone and feel and scares as the other films. So if you enjoy the first 3 Hell House LOCs, this one is the origin story to that. So obviously, you could watch this one first, because it is technically the origin, or watch it chronologically when the films came out. This one would obviously be the 4th one. I do look forward to what this franchise does in the future. I do enjoy the franchise overall, even if I acknowledge the films aren't the greatest quality. It is a series that I enjoy quite a bit. On the 4th, I rewatched Attack on Titan, the final chapters, special number 2, with my wife, because she finally caught up on Attack on Titan. One of the most heartbreaking, tragic, exciting, greatest finales of all time to an anime. Should have been in theaters. They're releasing it in theaters this year, but they should have done that originally. The next film I watched in the early November was from a band. A man from a band. Not the early November, though. From Blink-182 and Angels and Airwaves, I watched Monsters of California, directed by Thomas DeLonge. A film that is way too long. 110 minutes. This film should have been 70. If this film was a solid 70, solid 80 minutes, would have been a lot better in my opinion. 110 is just a little bit too long to get me on board. Teenager Dallas Edwards and his delinquent friends go on a quest for the meaning behind a series of mysterious paranormal events in Southern California. The truths they uncover begin to unravel extraordinary secrets. Gave this film a solid 2 stars. I like elements of this film. I like a lot of the vibe, the tone. The humor is obviously very immature, Blink-182 type humor. Richard Kind is in this film. I don't know how they were able to acquire him for this film. But this film does live and breathe California. You feel the California atmosphere in this. I wish it had a little bit of a higher effects budget, or if they could have done some of this practically, stuff like that, because I am a huge fan of Tom DeLonge. I'm a huge fan of what he has done, not only for music, but for, like alien culture, I guess. So I do like this film in theory and in concept and execution. I do not think it is the greatest final product, but I did enjoy watching it. It is a film I'd consider giving another chance down the road. I wish I would have been able to catch this in theaters. I'm not sure if it had a theater run. I might have had a very, very limited one, but I ended up seeing it on demand. I saw Tom DeLonge's first film in theaters for Angels and Airwaves, the film Love. So I wish they could have done more special events like that. They even did a live concert after the film at the time. But regardless, Monsters of California, it gets a thumb, not up, not down, but the thumb is just kind of straight in the center for me. Coming up next is one of my favorite new releases of the year, a film I enjoyed rather a lot. For some reason, Miles didn't. I don't know. Totally Killer. Murder is So, 1987. When the infamous Sweet 16 killer returns 35 years after his first murder spree to claim another victim, 17-year-old Jamie accidentally travels back in time to 1987, determined to stop the killer before he can start. This film just has all the elements of an iconic slasher in 2023. It's a standalone piece. It's not part of a franchise. It's not something that... It feels like an 80s slasher, not just because it takes place in the 80s with the time travel aspect to it. It feels like you're watching an 80s slasher. They did a really good job sort of nailing a lot of the tone of what you can expect from a horror comedy kind of at that time, maybe even like the early 90s. Obviously, with modern sensibilities, obviously it looks very modern, obviously it feels very modern, but it still fits in with that tone, in my opinion. This film is a 4-star film for me, everybody. 4-star film. I enjoyed it quite a lot, actually. There's a scene in the film where Bizarre Love Triangle is playing. Absolutely iconic. I love the scene on the porch where the kids want want to get let into the party, and it flash forwards to their future self, and they look nothing like each other. Like, it has like our main group of kids in the 80s who we later see as adults. They show up to this party, and you see the way they look. When it gets to their future selves, they look nothing. Like, there's no way that they would have aged to look the way that they do. They look absolutely nothing like their future selves, which I think is kind of in tune with something that you could do in an 80s film. Do a flashback, and it's like, okay, how the hell did this person end up looking like that person? Time happens all at once. Like, once you do something in the past, it's kind of affecting what's going on in the future. Like, it's not exactly a cause and effect. Everything is all connected. To take this back to something I was talking about a couple seconds ago, it's like Eren within the paths in Attack on Titan. Everything kind of takes place in the same sort of realm. Everything is taking place at the same time in the same universe. It's not like a Back to the Future kind of thing. Things are directly being correlated. All the timelines are being interwoven, I guess. It's kind of hard to describe, but it makes sense not only in Attack on Titan, but it makes sense in Totally Killer as well. It's got some decent kills. A lot of it takes place at a carnival. It's just a really fun film. I enjoy it a lot. The next day, I did a triple feature in theaters, everybody. A triple feature in theaters, which is bonkers for me. I watched two films that were very, very similar. I watched one film at the end of the night that was not only different in tone, but it was different because it was not a horror film. So we will not necessarily be covering Saltburn in this. But earlier in the day, I woke up early, and that's why I love some of the theaters around me, because they show films like starting at like 9 a.m. So I was able to catch like a 9 a.m. showing of It's a Wonderful Knife, and then I was able to catch like a noon showing of Thanksgiving in order to make it to, stop and have dinner and then see Saltburn later on in the night. But we're starting with It's a Wonderful Knife. This Christmas, your wishes will come true, and your nightmares too. Winnie's life is less than wonderful 1 year after saving her town from a psychotic killer on Christmas Eve. When she wishes she was never born, she finds herself magically transported into a nightmarish parallel universe. With the murderous maniac now back, she must team up with a misfit to identify the culprit and get back to her own reality. So obviously, it's a parody of It's a Wonderful Life, only it's a slasher. It's a Wonderful Knife. I will say the film, like, tonally, like, it didn't really click all the way all of the time, but it was still a solid 3-star flick for me. It is a little bit predictable. You can see a lot of these things coming. And like I said, like, the film has like a very like upbeat tone, and then it has a very horrific tone at times too. It feels like all the time it didn't really know what it wanted to be, but it was very enjoyable. Out of the two films I watched that day, It's a Wonderful Knife and Thanksgiving, they are incredibly similar. They're incredibly similar films. They both focus on a murder that happens around a specific holiday. Time passes, and the killer comes back. They're essentially the same exact concept for a film. Obviously, once you get into some of the specifics, it's a little bit different. There's no, alternate universes being portrayed in Thanksgiving. But the general concept of the film is very similar. Thanksgiving, of course, directed by Eli Roth. There will be no leftovers. After a Black Friday riot ends in tragedy, a mysterious Thanksgiving-inspired killer terrorizes Plymouth, Massachusetts, the birthplace of the holiday. Picking off residents one by one, what begins as random revenge killings are soon revealed to be part of a larger, sinister holiday plan. This is another one where it is a bit predictable. It is a bit predictable. It has a very high-named actor in it from... what show was it? Grey's Anatomy. Mick Dreamy or whatever his name was. Patrick Dempsey is in it. The other one has It's a Wonderful Knife, has Justin Long in it, so an icon of the horror industry. This one has sort of an icon of sort of the mainstream public. So I feel like a lot of people were seeing Thanksgiving at the time and not seeing It's a Wonderful Knife. I do think both films are a good double feature because they are so similar. Like, I watched both and it just felt like they kind of complemented each other. They're both holiday slashers. I would recommend maybe watching them in reverse. Like, maybe you watch maybe you watch Thanksgiving on actual Thanksgiving. Maybe you watch it and it ends right at the stroke of midnight. It's now the Christmas season. You're popping on It's a Wonderful Knife. Be a hell of a double feature, ladies and gents. Hell of a double feature. Went to the theater a lot these few days, but not for horror films. As I said, I saw Saltburn later that evening. The following day, I watched The Holdovers, which was one of my favorite films of the year, and watched Killers of the Flower Moon directly after that. So seeing a lot of great films in theaters, not necessarily horror films. But regardless, straight to streaming, I saw When Evil Lurks. Thank God. This film was great. It was great. Solid 3.5, which for a horror film, it's pretty good for me. There's no point in praying. Residents of a small rural town discover that a demon is about to be born among them. They desperately try to escape before the evil is born, but it may be too late. It's got insane kills. It's got some good gore. It's got some great suspense. It has some great character arcs. This film is just really good. It's definitely one to check out if you haven't seen it already. Again, this was another one that was kind of straight to streaming. I don't know if it really had a theater run. If it did, it was very limited because I did not hear about it until it was on streaming. But one of the greatest of 2023 for sure. One of the best films I saw in 2023 for sure in the horror sphere. Not the best, but one of the best. After that, watched Dark Harvest. This one I watched on streaming as well. This is a film I wanted to see for a while. This was directed by David Slade. Don't want to say I was overly disappointed with this, but I definitely was hoping it would be a lot better than what it was. Evil Stalks. In a small Midwestern town, a deadly annual ritual unfolds when the mythical nightmare Sawtooth Jack rises from the cornfield and challenges the town's teenage boys in a bloody battle of survival. So it's basically like every year, Sawtooth Jack arrives. All the boys that are coming of age, they're like seniors in high school, they are given the task to dispose of this creature within the town. They're given the task to dispose of the creature. Whoever kills the creature is basically the town hero of the next year, basically. There are some twists and turns that go along with that. I do not want to give everything away. One thing about this film that is very noticeable is that this takes place way back in the day before the Misfits were a band. But everyone's wearing Crimson Ghost masks in this film as they're stalking the creature. So you're thinking of the Misfits constantly. The creators of this film must have been huge fans of the band. Otherwise, why would you choose Crimson Ghost masks to be worn by the main characters in your film? So there are a lot of things in this film that I like. I like the fall aesthetic of the film, obviously. But a lot of the story beats don't really hit for me, and it is incredibly predictable. The next one I watched was a film that's been on my watch list forever. It's an anthology film from the 70s called Screams of a Winter Night. I absolutely love the poster for this film. It's something that was kind of sitting in my watch list on Shudder for a long time. For a long time I've been wanting to watch this film, but it was just tough finding a night in winter where everything was aligning properly. It was snowy outside. You could hear the wind. It had to be nighttime when I was watching it, of course. And this is a film that would have been hard to get my wife on board to watch, so it had to be a night where I was home by myself. So I had to wait for her to have plans. And as soon as all the stars were aligning, I looked outside. It was cold. The wind was blowing. There was snow on the ground. I was like, it's finally time to watch Screams of a Winter Night. In the shadow of evil, in the echo of sin, in the icy state of moonlight, our ghostly tale begins. 10 college friends take a winter weekend camping trip to Lake Durand. The group holes up in an old cabin where the original owners were once found dead, with local Native Americans suspecting that they were victims of a spirit called Shatsaba. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. It's been a long time since I've seen this film. As the group nestles in for the night, they start telling each other scary stories, and that's where the anthology takes place. So the wraparound of this is them in the cabin, and they're all telling little ghost stories within. It's not the most entertaining film, but it's a good aesthetic film. I look forward to watching this again on a winter's night because it was enjoyable to do. I can acknowledge it's not the greatest film ever in the world, but Screams of a Winter Night was good. It's very uncommon to kind of find anthology films from this time period that are worth watching. So this one, I think, out of the ones that I have seen kind of this time period, this one was a good one to watch. This was the late 70s, by the way, the late 70s. Next, I saw what you could possibly consider the best horror film of 2023. If you consider it a horror film, I do. I certainly consider it a horror film. We're talking Godzilla Minus One. They made Godzilla scary again. This film was great. I saw it in a big RPX cinema. It was wonderful. Film is absolutely wonderful. Post-war Japan from 0 to minus. In post-war Japan, Godzilla brings new devastation to an already scorched landscape. With no military intervention or government help in sight, the survivors must join together in the face of despair and fight back against an unrelenting horror. If they're calling Godzilla an unrelenting horror in the description, I think it's fair to classify it as a horror film. So this was probably my favorite horror film of the year. It had to have been. I can go back to my list because I rank everything as I watch it. Let me see where I ranked Godzilla Minus One. Did I rank it as my number one horror film of last year? Let me take a look. Ooh, I put it right below Skinamarink. It's right below Skinamarink. I consider them about equal, though. I consider them about equal. Godzilla Minus One has something going for it that a lot of Godzilla films do not have going for it. You were 1,000,000,000% invested within these human characters. This human story is probably the best human story in any Godzilla film up until this point, which this is the most recent one. I can think of very few others. I mean, the 90s version of Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah has a good one. Of course, the original one has a good one as well. But they're few and far between, without a doubt. Like, without a doubt, the human stories are few and far between good stories. I mean, look at the latest Godzilla vs. Kong, if you want an example of that. My favorite scene of this film is the beginning scene, where Godzilla is attacking sort of the air base on the island. That's my favorite scene. I love the ship crew in this. I love, like, the old professor type guy. I think he's great. I think the captain of the ship, the sort of no-nonsense, burly fisherman guy, he's great. Of course, our main character is great. The woman he lives with and the daughter as well. I just love the whole dynamic of everyone coming together within this film in order to try to stop Godzilla. I think this film is an absolute masterpiece. It's probably, if there's a good case that it could be the best Godzilla film ever made, I'm still particular to the original Gojira. But Godzilla Minus One definitely makes a case for one of the greatest Godzilla films of all time. So good that I saw it in theaters twice. I saw this film in theaters twice. Of course, saw it in this original format and again when they released Godzilla Minus One minus color. So a film that it's hard to get me to go see a film in theater twice, ladies and gents, but I did it for Godzilla Minus One. One of my favorite films of the year, definitely, if not the greatest horror film of the year, definitely tied for my greatest horror film of 2023. And that wraps up the month of November. We're on to December, the home stretch of everything that I watched during 2023. Watched a few films that weren't exactly horror, but then finally, on December 19th, I don't know how I made it all the way to the 19th of December without watching a horror film. I watched Oracle. It's a film I saw on HBO Max. The poster just intrigued me. It was a couple creepy looking trees around a house that gave the illusion of a skull. Kind of had like a cabin fever thing. I don't know. For whatever reason, it just kind of really spoke to me, the poster for it. So I popped it on. It was a random watch, and here's the description via Letterboxd. The past is a presence. A young woman accepts a job on a property with a traumatic history. Upon her arrival, she soon realizes that the nightmares of her childhood are connected to the evil within the house. This film was not great. It was a very lazy, sloppily made film. It's just an allegory for racism. We know racism is bad. This film does not add any layers to that. It's just a very surface level racism is bad film, which is a good concept. I mean, obviously, it's a good concept. Racism is bad. But when your film is that surface level, it doesn't really lead to a lot of deep characters, a lot of deep story, anything remotely entertaining. Definitely on the bottom tier of films that I watched last year. Just a very not very well put together film. I appreciate the intent, obviously, but not the greatest film to watch. So I don't necessarily recommend Oracle. A few days later, watch The Velvet Vampire from 1971. Watched this with my wife. It was a hell of a time. She's waiting to love you to death. A married couple accepts the invitation of mysterious vixen Diane LaFoe to visit her in her secluded desert estate. Tensions arise when the couple, unaware at first that Diane is a centuries-old vampire, realize that they are both objects of the Pale Temptress's seduction. It's a solid flick. 3.5 stars. There's not a ton to say about it. I love 70s era vampire films. So there's a ton about this film that I enjoy. It's kind of hard to break it down, unless you're really going over everything. But The Velvet Vampire gets a thumbs up for me. Sorry, I'm just trying to really breeze through these past couple in December. So after that, I watched The Sacrifice Game, which was a Christmas-themed film. I had a lot of hype for this film. A lot of people that I know that had saw it really enjoyed it. Myself, I was a little bit disappointed. The second film so far in December, I was kind of disappointed with. The Sacrifice Game, it was a new release that year. It came out in 2023. This Christmas, raise a little hell. Christmas break 1971, Samantha and Clara, two students who are staying behind for the holidays at their boarding school, must survive the night after the arrival of uninvited visitors. It's basically a horror movie version of The Holdovers. The Holdovers, one of the greatest films I saw this year. The Sacrifice Game, definitely towards the bottom. There was just something about it that didn't hit. I mean, it wasn't that entertaining. Scares weren't that great. I didn't find it that interesting. And again, I had just watched a film a few weeks prior that was essentially the same concept and just executed a billion times better. So The Sacrifice Game, another film that sadly I cannot recommend. The day after Christmas, I realized as I was looking ahead in Letterboxd just now that I made an oopsie. When I watched Attack on Titan, the final chapter, special number 2 back in November, that was the premiere. Because in December, this probably explains why I wasn't watching too many horror films in December. My wife and I rewatched all of Attack on Titan. Her watching it for the first time, me rewatching it to get her hyped to watch these finales. Because I told her they were masterpieces. So we watched Special 1 and Special 2 both on the day after Christmas after wrapping up watching the series. Not a ton to say about it without talking all about Attack on Titan. I'd love to do an Attack on Titan podcast. But regardless, we're here to talk about some horror. And we only got a couple more, guys. Just a couple more before we wrap this up and ride off into the sunset. Creature from the Haunted Sea. From 1961, directed by the late, great Roger Corman. What was the unspeakable secret of the Sea of Lost Ships? The unspeakable secret of the Sea of Lost Ships. That was like a weird sentence for me to read for some reason. A crook decides to bump off members of an inept crew and blame their deaths on a legendary sea creature. What he doesn't know is that the creature is real. It's an iconic looking monster. This is one of those classic films where it shows you the poster, it kind of gives you a tease on what the monster could look like, and then the monster in the film looks totally ridiculous. I mean, the poster of this film shows a woman in the hand of a monster, leading you to potentially believe that this is a giant monster. This could be like a King Kong-sized monster of the sea. Of course, it's just a dude in a ridiculous suit. He's the size of a normal person. But the monster is iconic within its own right. You've probably seen this creature, even if you haven't seen the film. He kind of pops up every Halloween. Not like a mainstream monster, but like if you're watching like a little compilation of like little clips of B movies and stuff like that, he's thrown right in there, you know, with the giant claw and robot monster, and the giant monsters like them and stuff like that. Like you always see like little clips of this dude. So Creature from the Haunted Sea, do not recommend it as a film, but it's got a monster that's got a little bit of a nostalgic value to me. The last film that I watched this year in the horror realm was another new release called Birth/Rebirth. Every body has potential. A single mother and a childless morgue technician are bound together by their relationship to a little girl they have reanimated from the dead. This film, I remember enjoying it a little bit when I watched it. I mean, I gave it 2.5. I remember it being a fine, solid flick. But to be honest with you guys, I don't remember a damn thing about this film. I don't remember a damn thing about Birth/Rebirth. It did not leave a solid impression on me. So all I can say is that it's a solid one-time watch, but you're not going to remember it. Because I sure didn't. And I remember a lot of random-ass shit, but I don't remember a lot from this film at all. And that was the last film that I watched of the year. I watched that on the 31st of December. So that wraps up my year of horror for 2023. It's been a long road, guys. This is part 4 of every horror film that I saw in 2023. We're going to cut the bullshit, and we're just going to wrap this sucker up. Well, that's about it for this time, you guys. I hope you enjoyed the finale of every single horror film that I saw in 2023 reviewed. If you guys enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to the show, helping spread the good word about Buddy's House of Horror, letting your friends, family know about it. Anyone who's interested in the store, please send this in their direction. And with that, we're just going to wrap up this podcast because I'm stumbling over my words left and right. So now it's time to go take care and stay spooky, everybody.